Hello, it's Dr. Nick Mabbott from Beyond Midnight Consulting. It's normally around this time of year that we put the family in the car and we do long journeys to holiday destinations. We often are up late packing the car. We set off early to avoid other traffic, and usually within a couple of hours of driving, the rest of the family's asleep in the car and it leaves the driver to drive all by themselves. As a consequence of this, there are a lot of fatigue crashes on holiday drives, and I've put together 10 tips to help you avoid fatigue on holiday drives. Tip number one, plan your journey well. So if you have something like a 5 or 6 hour journey in the car, perhaps you want to measure the drive and see how long it takes and add an extra half an hour. If you've got a 10-hour drive or somewhere around that sort of size drive, you might want to add an hour of drive. Why would you add to the drive? Well, it's quite simple. A lot of people are in a hurry to get to their destination, and in being in a hurry, it often makes us make mistakes along the way because we try and overtake at what we believe to be opportune moments, but sometimes that can be highly risky. We push on past our limits quite often, and we may end up driving fatigued. So when you're planning your journey, maybe get the family together and have a look at your destination and treat it like the journey is a part of the holiday. So if, for example, it's a 10-hour journey, break it into smaller sections, perhaps 2 hours at a time. It doesn't really matter how long it is, but I always recommend stopping before you get tired. So maybe it's an hour and a half. So have a look at the map and plan stops where it might benefit you, it might benefit the kids. There might be well-known historical sites there that you can stop and have a look at. There might be playgrounds along the way for the kids to let off a bit of steam. Kids don't go well in a car for hours and hours on end. They need to get up and run around. So sometimes stopping at destinations where there's a nice park the kids can play in can be a really good idea. So tip number one, plan your journey, allow extra time to get there, because that will provide a safer and much more enjoyable journey so that you're not just worried about the end point. You can actually enjoy the journey along the way. Number two, plan your vehicle check well in advance. Perhaps take it to a mechanic to get a safety check all your tires, make sure the pressures are okay. Also check the spare tire. Often people find that they put the spare tire on only to find that it's flat, and that's not much good. Also make sure that you've got all the tools for changing a tire, and extra water, extra coolants, fluids for the car, oils and things like that. So make sure your vehicle is in good condition. I often throw in a few rubbish bags for in the cabin so that the car doesn't become a mess and it's a bit more pleasant to drive in. Tip number three, this is a very important one, pack in advance. Set up a list of all the things you'll need at your destination. So if it's camping, make sure you include all of the camping gear, include all your personal items, your clothing, all the sorts of things you need. Check out the temperatures and the conditions for where you are going to be to find out whether it's hot or cold. I often find that I forget to pack jackets for cold areas because I live in quite a warm climate. So when you pack in advance, perhaps if the kids have stuff that they need to pack, find a spot in the house where you can pack all of your things together and have checklists there so that you can tick them off as you go. And if you can have everything in that place, say the day before you are going, then that's great. You don't have to then worry about staying up too late because you're packing and so on. It also gives whoever's packing the car a really good idea of how much room is required. And don't forget, when you pack the vehicle, make sure you have access to all of the tools you need, perhaps to change a tire, a first aid kit, and things like that for along the way. Point number four, again, very important. go to bed early. What I suggest for the safest fatigue-free trip is to have at least 3 nights before the trip of a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That way, whoever's driving, so whether it be a couple of parents, make sure that both of you have ample sleep so that there is no sleep debt. Most of the fatigue that we get on the road comes from sleep debts that we are trying to pay back on the way. And what I mean is the brain tries to pay back the sleep debt while you're driving. If you don't have a sleep debt, you're in a great position. If you have a good circadian rhythm, so you're going to bed, say 10 o'clock every night, getting up around 6, have the same rhythm. Make sure the car is packed and everything's out of the way. You might even want to order in food that night so you're not up late cleaning up and things like that. Go to bed at the normal time, and that leads on to point 5, don't wake too early. A lot of people make the mistake of waking up at say 3 or 4 o'clock to try and beat the traffic and get to their destination as soon as possible. But of course, if you do that, you often go without sleep. If you're waking up at say 3 o'clock, you need to be in bed around 7 to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And that's not going to happen because we know that on one night, if you go to bed early, you can't actually get the sleep. You need to be in the rhythm. So keep the same bedtimes, 10 p.m., 6 a.m., something like that, and then just drive off at say 7 a.m. And if it's a 10-hour trip, you're still going to be there by 5 p.m. that day, plus the extra hour or so for all of your breaks. So 6 p.m, you'll get there just in time for dinner. But because you've got no sleep debt, and because you're going to take ample breaks along the way, remember point 1, planning your journey, then you will arrive in much better condition. You won't be totally tired and exhausted from driving because you've had the right amount of breaks. So point 5, don't wake up early. Plan 6, plan to share the driving. So point 6 actually. And what I mean by that is if you plan to swap drivers every now and then, that is really important. I do a lot of fatigue crash investigation, and nearly every crash, the driver who is falling asleep at the wheel has the opportunity to swap driving. But you know what? They won't, because when you are tired behind the wheel, the brain dumbs down to the point where you do not want to swap driving, you just want to push on. So if you plan to take breaks, say every hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is, in line with your journey management plan, then you will deliberately swap drivers, and that way you can keep fresh. And that will really help with the fatigue and the boredom and everything else to have a great journey. Point 7, if the passengers are asleep, often the driver is too. When the passengers are in the back asleep, that's not such a big deal. But I do suggest that if anyone's sleeping in the back, please do not take off your sash seatbelt. Where people have just left the lap belt on and laid down on the back seat, in the crashes, they tend to have horrific injuries and they are often fatal. So I urge you, if you're sleeping in the back, even though it's not quite as comfortable, to just lean back, leave your sash belt on and sleep that way. If you're the front passenger, please do not sleep, because in most of those cases, if you're asleep, the driver will look over every now and then, see that you're asleep, and they won't apply normal fatigue management controls like winding down the window, stopping to take brief breaks, things like that. They will just push on in an effort to try not to wake you up. So very important, if you're a passenger in the front, you have one job, and that is to make sure that the driver is wide awake. Point 8, mobile phone use. Absolutely no excuse for the driver of the vehicle to use a mobile phone. Leave that for the passengers. That's the end of point 8. Nothing else to be said. Point 9, perhaps you might want to consider developing or putting together a driving meal and snacks. And what I mean by that is, if you're enjoying your journey because you've planned it well and you've had the right stops, plan to have a picnic along the way with the food that you like and the food that is healthy for you, rather than stopping at rest stops and eating, in often cases, junk food, high in fats and sugars that will put you to sleep at the wheel quite quickly. So you might want to plan meals, with a lot of proteins, boiled eggs, a little bit of jerky and things like that, but also nice healthy salads that you can really enjoy, help make you feel fresh along the way. So point 9, driving meals and snacks. Final point, point 10, do not drive past your limits. At this point, I'd like you to really consider forgetting the term driver fatigue. One simple reason for this: I can have 100 people in front of me at one of my fatigue management sessions, and I can say to them, at what point would you stop the vehicle to take a break because you feel fatigued? Often the response is when my eyes start closing, my head starts nodding, or I start having microsleeps. The problem there is it's way too late. Let's break it down into 3 different types of fatigue. Driving tired. So here's the deal. I don't drive tired. I always stop before I get tired, and that way I don't seem to get tired. I also don't drive with a sleep debt, and that helps. If you start to get a little bit tired behind the wheel, you'll normally notice that your eyes will start getting a little bit itchy or scratchy. You get a little bit uncomfortable. You have to start moving around in the chair, start getting a bit stiff in the back. That's when you should stop right then and there. And just a quick stop, 2 or 3 minutes, a few stretches, maybe a mouthful of water and some fresh air, a bit of sunlight in your eyes, really good at that point. And that should return you to a really good driving condition again. Now, how long you get out of that, well, we don't know. But when you start feeling itchy and a little bit tired again, just stop again. The problem is people won't stop there because you're not fatigued. So forget that term, as I said. Stop when you're tired. If you go past that, well, then you get to a next level of driving, which is some real impairment kicking in there. I call that drowsy driving. And when you're drowsy driving, this is where the eyes are hard to keep open. And you can drive down the road and you don't actually absorb the environment. You see what's going on, but you can't remember where you've been for the last couple of kilometers. Once you get to drowsy driving, that is your brain preparing you to go to sleep, which is why you don't lay down memory and things like that. So let me expand on the problems of that impairment at that level. At that level, well, first up, you won't remember where you've been, and you might not be planning your next stop or where to turn and things like that. So that's part of it. But also, and really importantly, your driving reaction time, which is normally around 1 second, will go way out to 3 or 4 seconds. So that means if something runs onto the road, you'll see it, your brain will basically acknowledge that you see it, then you'll hit it. And by that time, your brain has worked out you probably should stop, but you've already hit it. So your reaction time is way too late, 3 to 4 seconds, and this is what can cause a lot of accidents, especially with fauna on the road. So very important. So that's drowsy driving. Once you get to drowsy driving, the problem is here, a 2-minute break will not fix drowsy driving. Think of it this way, your brain is trying to put you to sleep. How can we avoid falling asleep at the wheel? Simple. We stop in a safe place. We get the kids and the other passenger, whoever is in the passenger side, to go off for maybe a 15-20 minute walk or a play in a playground or an open field or something like that. bearing in mind that if you're driving through bush and things like that, you need to be aware of the wildlife and what can happen there. So the reason for everyone going off and leaving you is because I want you to get out of the driver's seat, climb in the back seat, lay down, set your alarm for 20 minutes and have a 20-minute nap. That 20-minute nap, and I'll show you this in other videos that I'll be doing as part of this series, is that the brain builds up a chemical known as adenosine, which drives your brain to go to sleep. And when you sleep, you recycle that adenosine and turn it back into adenosine triphosphate, which is your fuel that your brain uses for energy. When you have a 20-minute nap, you will recycle enough of this fuel to get you roughly 2 hours of energy for driving again. So what I recommend is, if you stop, you can have a strong coffee, but then a 20-minute nap. When you wake up, get up, have a bit of a walk around and a stretch, and make sure you're okay. If you're not okay to go, let the other driver drive the vehicle. If you're not okay and you're the only driver, perhaps you might want to just have something to eat, something to drink, and then see how you feel again. But it's very important that when you're drowsy, you have some level of nap, because that's what your brain is requiring to stop trying to keep on putting you to sleep. Now, if you don't stop when you're drowsy, because unfortunately the brain is dumbed down to a position where you often push through, then you'll get into sleepy driving. Let me just rewind a bit. When you're in drowsy driving, you can often do micro sleeps of between 1 and 5 seconds. Again, very dangerous, because at 100 kilometers an hour, you're traveling at 27.8 meters per second with your eyes closed. Now, once you get past drowsy and into sleepy driving, the sleep that you have then is not necessarily a micro sleep. It's the start of a 90-minute sleep cycle, which means when you're in that type of sleep, you don't automatically wake up when the wheels touch the gravel or those audible tactile edge lines on the side of the road. You will usually go 2 to 3 seconds off the road before you wake up, and then by the time you've tried to overcorrect, you're in a lot of trouble. And often this is what I see in the fatal crashes. So point 10, do not drive past your limits. Stop before you get tired. If you get tired, stop and take a quick 2-3 minute break and stretch and drink water. If you get past driving tired and get into drowsy, 20-minute nap is the only thing that's going to allow you to possibly drive safely. If you get to sleepy driving, I recommend you totally stop driving and let the other drivers have a drive for a while. So that's my top 10 tips. Don't forget to go to my website, beyondmidnight.org. Have a look at my free posters. You can sign up for newsletters. And sometime next year, I'll have a book out called Beyond Midnight, The Wonder of Sleep. All of this and a lot more will be in that. I do wish you safe travels.